Welcome to the Stories with Traction podcast. I'm your host, Matt ZAUN. Thank you for joining us as we uncover how stories are one of the most important aspects of your business. We'll talk about struggles, victories, and how you can utilize strategic storytelling to inspire those around you to action. Enjoy this episode. I'm extremely excited for this episode because at the time of this recording, we're heading into the Super Bowl. And as many people listening can imagine, to be a Super Bowl team, you have to have different processes in place. You have to have different systems. You have to have a playbook that's going to work. And I'm excited because today I'm joined by KIVA SLADE, who is the owner of 516 Collaborative, and she is a process improvement expert. So I'm excited to talk about processes and to talk about a sound business playbook. Welcome, KIVA.
Hello, Matt. So excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here. I'm ecstatic just because I feel like a lot of businesses, one, they're anticipating the Super Bowl because a lot of the people I work with are football fans. But they're also really mindful of structures and systems and formulas and processes. Like those words are music to their ears. They want a playbook. They want to make sure that what they're doing does have intention behind it. So I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit more about that because I think what you do is going to be extremely helpful to my audience. So let's get kicked off with a little bit about your background, just different things that put you in a position to be where you are. So based on a lot of stuff I've read and content that I've seen you put out, that you are, I don't want to use the word obsessed, but you are very interested in habits and systems. And I think that makes you you. And I really appreciate a lot of the different value you put out into the world. So what positioned you to get to this place where you were focused on processes?
Yeah, I love that question. So actually, my journey is definitely not one of a straight line. Okay. Many years ago, I like to say I actually, after grad school, I went into local government and really found that was a place that I enjoyed, starting out as a management and budget analyst in our county government. Who knew that regression analysis that you do in grad school is actually going to have a purpose? I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this with the firefighter budget. Who knew? So felt like, okay, I was definitely winning, but went from there to federal government. And I served starting off as a senior legislative assistant for a member of Congress, and then became her legislative director. And so, I have a BA in political science. And so it was exciting to be in that realm and in that environment. And I really loved doing policy work. I loved the things that we did. And honestly, during that process, it was like, this is exciting. How could I not continue to stay here? And thankfully for me, I was able to, and I say that, was able to leave before some of the things that started happening in our country, especially with 9/11. So I left a few months before that happened. And I went to a nonprofit. But it was, of course, just to leverage the Hill contacts that I have because there's a revolving door there. So doing that work was also really beneficial in the nonprofit space. And then I met this guy. And honestly, within 6 months, we got married. Wow. And it was just like, yeah. So it was just like totally this quick shift that happened. And our daughter came later. And it was really interesting because she wound up being diagnosed with some health challenges. They presented in a way, though, that kind of seemed rather minor at first until the doctor comes back and was like, do you want the good news or the bad news? I've never understood that question. I don't want either parts of the news at this point, if you're going to separate them into good and bad. But she wound up having to have a liver transplant. And so that wound up leading to obviously hospital stays and so many other things that I was like, I became then a stay-at-home mom because of all of the things that we were having to do. And my husband's job in the government, we weren't giving that up. So I gave up my career and I stayed home with our daughter. Our son then came along. And honestly, I spent almost 20 years as a stay-at-home mom. And so, want to talk about processes and systems? Have a child come home with 11 medications that she needs to have to take, and they're not all at the same time, dosage. I literally had this huge chart on the wall. People would come at our house, and I'm like, if you have questions, let me know. But literally everything was color coded so that there was just nothing that was ever missed. And her hospital staff used to joke. They were like, did you go to medical school? I'm like, no. Okay. But like anything that came up, I was like the researcher. I'm a high fact finder in the Colby. I just devoured all of it. So I say all of that to say like that pretty much I feel has led me to where I am. I've always been a high fact finder. And so I love the challenges that come with different systems and processes and seeing how things can obviously work better. And so once I've done that, and through my stay-at-home mom career, I love to say, goodness gracious, I've done pretty much everything that my kids have done. They did speech and debate. I was the state director for that. I was the one
That's
who
awesome.
managed the whole tabulation room at the debates because I was that spreadsheet mama who could do the databases and everything else. So you name it, I've done it. Even their homeschool co-op, I took them from paper registration to an online system. And because I just was like, you guys are killing too many trees. There's a better way to do this. So through the use of Google Forms and some other things, we literally created a whole entire system that they can now and still are using, goodness, 7 years later, on how to just do their registration for their co-op online. So It's been a series of just, I feel like life events that have all culminated in that arriving at this space and saying, okay, the kids are off to school now. What's mom going to do? Because I knew I didn't want to go back to politics. So what was I going to do? And it was really starting my own business to help businesses in that way. Because I feel like a solid foundation is what's going to help most businesses actually have that longevity, because the numbers show that we start businesses at high rates. But when we start to looking at, what happens after 5 years, how many actually make it to 10 years, those numbers drastically are reduced, especially within the area of women-owned businesses. So It's just super important that we have a solid foundation. And what that looks like is really having some really good systems in place.
Sure. Wow. I appreciate you sharing all that. That's a lot to unpack with what you said. So one of the things that I'll just share, but I find it as you're talking, this is what's coming up to me. And I find this fascinating. About a month or two ago, I was talking to someone that I hadn't talked to in a while, and it was a pretty long, in-depth conversation. And she said to me, I don't quite understand it, but something has really changed in you. What changed? And I paused and I'm like, what changed? I mean, obviously there's been a lot of changes in the last few years, but I couldn't pinpoint what she was referring to. Like, what does she mean by this? And my wife was involved in the conversation and we were like processing together, like, what changed? Like, what does that even mean? She said, well, you're able to connect better than I've ever seen. Like something like your empathy has skyrocketed. And basically the only thing that we could think that changed is because of the situations that have happened in the last couple of years. I spent more time with my children than I ever have. And my wife was telling me that I really shifted from being so focused on go, do, like work, that the pendulum swung. And now it's more of a happy medium, more of a harmonious situation where we have more of that balance. But I've been connecting with my kids more than ever before. And someone was telling me, my ability to connect and have empathy skyrocketed. And back to what you had said about being stay at home, I feel like prior to COVID, a lot of people said that almost in a negative type way. But I think more and more people are realizing that their ability to connect, their ability to do processes, their ability, like so much has gone up. And what's funny is it didn't dawn on me until I processed this with my wife, but I was in a conversation a couple months prior to this conversation that I'm referring to. And someone told me, she said, I got my MBA. So this person got their MBA from an Ivy League school. And she said she learned more from being a stay-at-home mom than than her education at an MBA at an Ivy League school. And I'm like, what are we missing as a culture that we're not talking about this more? So I really appreciate you saying that. So that legitimately put you in a position to be who you are today regarding processes. And I just want to stress that.
It really did. I don't think that I love the fact that when I see people talk about that nowadays, because I do feel like, especially for women in particular, it had a lot of negative connotations or, you know, things of that sort. Oh, you stayed at home, or, I mean, I'll be honest. My own mom was like, you have a master's degree. What are you doing at home teaching your kids? Like, what are you doing? It was not something that was necessarily valued or treasured. But I do think that even as business people, that like our business shouldn't run our lives. Like, you know, like that just should not be the case. And I love that the pendulum has swung in the opposite direction for so many people. And I think that we have more, our lives are more full now that we're finding that balance or that harmonious middle ground. And it's so important and necessary that it feeds all the different parts of us. And the go, go, go is great. But like, honestly, now, like I've said, my kids are in school. The conversations that you have and those connections that are there and are so much deepened. And like my kids literally tell me way more some days than I might want to hear about what's taking place in college life. But it's truly because we've lived life in a way that they know they can come and they can talk to me. I can help them now, with different things to help coach them through what they're thinking through, what they're going through. And I value that time that we spent living life together in that way, because I feel like it has allowed for such a deeper, richer relationship that we all have now. So it's definitely a win-win, I think.
Oh, absolutely. No, I completely agree. And I want to stress something that you said about it is positive. More people are looking at the harmony of family and business, but I don't feel, this is me personally speaking, I don't feel like people need to think they're giving up something, because I feel, especially when it comes to men, and I hate to bring this up, but I think it's so important, and based on what I've witnessed, I do think there's a lot of elements of truth to this, is that one of the things that I talk about in my workshops, I do a lot of strategic storytelling workshops, and we talk about different emotions regarding stories, right? There's a lot of power in different elements of emotion. And what's interesting is a lot of men don't want to talk about it in depth, because I think the picture they have of emotion, I mean, everyone has different emotions, and there's tons of emotions, right? So I think the picture they have is like crying off in the corner. And that's like, there's so many other emotions. And it's amazing because I feel like a lot of the female business leaders that I work with, they understand the dynamic to connect with their staff. And I feel like a lot of the men business leaders that I work with, like there's such a challenge to get them to understand the elements of emotion. So it's not they're giving something up. It's not like, oh, because I'm spending more time with my family, my business is tanking. They can actually be learning so much about connecting and empathy and truly getting in touch with their emotions. And I know that sounds horrifying to a lot of men out there, but imagine their ability to persuade and impact and connect with people. It literally skyrockets. I mean, all of the individuals that I've worked with that are incredible, powerful leaders, they know how to connect with people. So I think it's so important what you're saying. Like it's invaluable what you're saying, because I my hope is that there's going to be a little bit of like generational change coming where we can have more harmony. I really like using the word harmony, because people always talk about work-life balance, but I also think like at times we're going to have to be more focused on business. At times we're going to need to be focused more on family. So I think there's definitely an element of harmony with that. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about that. And I hate to bring, I pause regarding bringing gender into it, but I do think there's a lot, at least with what I experience with it. I think it's really important to unpack. So have you had similar experiences dealing with men business leaders over female, like women business leaders, as far as their ability to have empathy?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting one. When I was thinking about it as you were speaking, and there's the level of some that are having the difficulty with where there are men who have the difficulty lacking empathy, and they actually want me to do more in the sense of, how do I work with my team? How do I communicate things with my team? But I think when you look also sometimes with women, there's a kind of a push pull of, I know I should have empathy, but I'm trying to embody this powerful CEO right now. So I don't want to have as much empathy as I might normally want to have. So it's like there's a battle taking place internally with them. And you have to often, I find myself reminding them, okay, let's take this into consideration. Let's look at this and really talk through and unpack what you said about their own feelings as it relates to that. Because I think sometimes with female business owners, there's also all the other stuff, the wife, the mom, the this, the that they're feeling so stretched that they're almost out of empathy, I want to say, when it comes sometimes to their team. And they're just like, I just want everything done and da, 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 and you have to sometimes slow the cart down with both sexes and say, let's look at what's taking place in the business, what's going on. And a lot of times what I've found is there's frustration because of a lack of any sort of documented processes or systems. And so there's that frustration that comes up. And then there's also a frustration around data, which is another thing that I've seen. And it's interesting a lot of times that some of my male clients, they're more apt to just go ahead and run with those numbers and they wait for the data. And sometimes my female clients have feelings of, my business isn't doing well, or this isn't happening well. And the data actually disproves that in a lot of cases, but they're more likely to go with what they were feeling, not so much with what the data says. So It's an interesting mix of the two, but I think in both cases, there's a struggle sometimes with empathy, and for different reasons though.
Sure. That's a really, really good point. So, and then speaking of emotion, we have, talk about emotional roller coasters. The last few years have been definitely the textbook example, definition of what an emotional roller coaster is. It's been up, it's been down, with all the different elements of, different variants and optimism, and then people's spirits being crushed, and then up and then down. And I think at the time of this recording, things are looking like they're going to be good in the next few months. And a lot of, especially medium-sized companies that I've seen, they had to do everything they could to survive so they could position themselves to thrive. And now a lot of them are in the thriving state right now. But again, it goes back to processes. Mm-hmm. So also at the time of this recording, we're heading into the Super Bowl fiasco, where everyone is going to be very interested in seeing the outcome of the upcoming game. And those two teams are thriving, right? They did exceptionally well. Now it is to decide who is the best, for lack of better words. And they had a lot of processes that went into that. They had a lot of strategy and systems and checks and balances. And one of the things I tell my kids that watch these games is, like, there's so much that went in on the back end, dreams and ambition and the blood, sweat, and tears. Like, there's a lot that went into it. So for businesses that are experiencing optimism, they're starting to thrive, they're starting to absolutely trend upward, to utilize what you had mentioned, the business playbook. Where do people start with that? Let's say they just figured out a way to get their head above water. Now they're starting to really succeed. They're looking at the future. What are some things, some simple, basic things that you really tell people to focus on right out of the gate?
Right out of the gate, I think one of the most important things is really focusing on what's the company's mission and what are the values. I think we kind of overlook that sometimes. And when you're starting to put things together, like in a business playbook, that really is the great foundation, because this playbook is what's going to be shared with your team, your current team, your future team. And you want to make sure that everybody is so crystal clear on what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And what are the values that relate to how we're going to show up for not only ourselves, each other, and our clients, to make sure that we're all aligned with that. So really getting that company, like I said, company information all distilled nicely so that everybody is on board with that. And then really moving into what are those policies? Okay, many people now, well, you might have a hybrid work environment. What does that policy look like? Who do people need to speak to for vacation time? Or what's the policy for equipment that's at home now that might need to come back into the office, or equipment that's in the office that might need to now go to someone's home? What does that policy look like for our company? And any additional policies? We have, obviously, there's a huge push for diversity and equity inclusion. Does your company have DEI policies? What are those? And where can everyone find those? I think that's super important. And then really starting to think about looking at the business as a business owner. Are there still things that are constantly in your head that you're having disappointment with, frustration, angst about? Why is this not happening in this particular way? We need to start getting those things out of your head and get them actually documented into a process so that it's easier now for your team to be able to repeat these things and actually get them off of your plate. I think the misperception that happens a lot of time is that people want to get things off their plate, but there's this like conundrum, like, well, I got to show someone how to do it. And if I have to show someone how to do it, I might as well just go ahead and do it because it saves me time. If that's the hamster wheel you're choosing to be on, it's just going to be a really long ride. Okay. So at some point, you really have to make that step into what I like to say is really fully step into being that CEO and say, no, this is really something that doesn't require my time. And I need to get this off my plate. And this is how I'm going to get this off my plate. So really starting with, I think those areas are super helpful for business owners because of the fact that you are now setting it like the playbook is getting written. And it's, I think, a key point. And you mentioned about those two Super Bowl teams and the amazing things that took place before they've gotten to this point. Your playbook is not a set it and forget it. It's a, we set it. We're going to look at this quarterly. You might have brought on additional team members. There might be some new policies that you've realized, oh, wow, we didn't cover that. That now needs to be covered. So it's never a set it and forget it. You have to definitely go back and literally put in place a plan to quarterly have it reviewed, quarterly have parts of it checked. And as you continue to build it out, it will obviously have more pieces to it. So you might have admin functions, financial functions, marketing functions, and then you'll have to put in a plan to, okay, when those particular functions are going to be reviewed and audited to make sure that things are still moving in the process that they need to.
Awesome. There's a lot of value with what you just said. So I do want to unpack a few of the pieces, particularly the business playbook that you had mentioned, mission values, as well as the documentation, getting it out of your head. So I want to highlight a few things that you had said. So the first, and I think absolutely, I'm in complete agreement with what you're saying. Very, very sound advice regarding the business playbook. One of the dangers that I see with business leaders is because we think in pictures, often our picture might not be matching up with our team members' picture. And one of the things that I talk about quite often is don't just focus on the words of the values, focus on the stories that exemplify those values. Because a lot of times business leaders will say, oh, put the customer first. And putting the customer first, the picture that business owner has is not the picture that one of their employees has. So by painting the picture through a story, they're really syncing up what they envision the customer being first is. So I think that that'd be very helpful to people, because one of the advantages that football teams have that a lot of people don't have in business is coaches are physically walking them through the plays, right? So they're literally, their bodies are literally being positioned and their coach is physically walking them through that. When this happens and the ball goes up, you need to be at this exact moment to catch the ball in this fashion. Like, so those players have those pictures so burned into their mind because they've gone through it time and time again. And oftentimes in business, especially people that are working from home or even hybrid, someone says something and we're communicating through words, but everyone has a different picture. So I just, what you said about the mission and the values, my challenge to everyone listening is, are you painting the picture for your team members? When you say, you know, we're about character and integrity and putting the customer first, whatever your values are you painting the picture through stories that really exemplify those values? So I think you're spot on regarding the business playbook. Awesome point. So I really appreciate you saying that. Also, the element of getting out of our own head, often sometimes the most powerful stories that we share are the stories we tell ourselves. And one of the things that I noticed personally is I was getting a lot of anxiety with different things because I kept telling myself different stories over and over and over again in my head. And one of the things that my wife has inspired me, has motivated me to do, is to start journaling more, because she keeps telling me, you have to get out of your head, you have to put it down on paper, and then once you have it on paper, then you can start like shifting to having processes, but you have to get it out of your anxiety stricken head, telling myself the story over and over again, and get it down. So I appreciate you mentioning that. So let's talk a little bit more about those two things, about the values. So do you think people should have a systematic approach regarding values? Because I see a lot of businesses view values almost as an afterthought. They're passionate about certain things, but it's kind of like just check the box, just have to put something down. So is there a systematic approach to the value portion? And then also I want you to talk more about the documentation from getting it from someone's head on paper.
Yeah, I definitely, one of the things I love to do, and we'll keep these analogies going, is I typically start my clients with developing their game plan. Because honestly, it really does start for me with that mission, vision, and values. And I don't want that to be the afterthought. I really, want people to spend the time to develop that in the beginning. And if you feel like, okay, Kiva, Matt, this is great, but my business has been in existence, it's not too late to go ahead and do that now and really work through what are the company's values. And like you said, really paint the picture of what that looks like to, integrity. What exactly does that look like in a business, and how does it show up internally as well as externally? Okay. And so it's super important that, to me, that's like that foundation that needs to be set, or in some cases, we're going to fix the cracks that you might feel are existing, but really to go dig deep into that so that it's not an afterthought and that it truly is understood, by the team, as well as clients can actually see it. And I think even involving previous customers in that and saying like, hey, these are our values. How do you feel we have shown up in these areas? And yeah, they will really let you know, you guys actually were amazing in these three. These two, I had no idea these were values of yours because X, Y, and Z. And that feedback is so important. And I think that's a huge part of all of this, is be open to feedback. Be open to feedback, even when you've distilled a process out. Be open to feedback that, hey, your way of doing it was great and it got it done, but there might have actually been a better way to do it. And someone who has that, they're like that frontline person, they're the boots on the ground actually doing it, is going to bring something different to it that you might not have ever focused on, thought about. And that's okay that the process gets changed, tweaked, because in the end, it's actually now better. And it's getting done in a better way. So always be open to feedback. I feel like being open to that curiosity that comes from actually getting things out of your head. And in that process, I feel like nowadays there's multiple ways that we can do that. Obviously, we're all thinking like, oh, well, just create a whole standard SOP. And that's great for some. I find that having utilizing a tool like Loom or Vidyard and recording yourself doing things in a video format, you can run that through Otter AI, have a transcript or a team member who actually, types it out so that you give it to a person in the visual and the written form to just really address everybody's different learning styles. and then actually allow that person, whomever's the one who's going to do it, to, like I said, go through it, make sure that it actually makes sense and it's done in a way that gets us to our end goal. And I think that's a big part about processes, is sometimes don't get lost in what the steps are. What's the end goal that we're actually trying to get done? And that's really going to be important in that process. And so really, I'd like to take people through steps. We really will go division by division, in order to map everything out. And I love how your wife was saying journaling. I'm a huge fan of like the 3M big wall sticky notes, and like my walls are adorned with them, because I think there is so much value when we do map things out and we write things out and we sketch things out. And it literally helps us, I think, to overuse a word here, process what we're actually thinking and what we're talking about. So in that visualization of it, to see, oh my goodness, that absolutely makes no sense. Why were we doing it this way for so long? Because sometimes we're caught up in the doing that we never take that, step back. And I was thinking about what you were saying with football. The coaches are walking them through, but even during a game, your offensive coordinator, your defensive coordinator, they're up top at the stadium looking down. Who takes that time to then look down and say, oh, that 10,000, 30,000 foot view, that's an amazing view, because you're seeing things at a totally different level than the coach who's right there looking out at the players on the field and they're all on the same playing field. So I think that that's another part of it, is that when we get the things out of our heads and we start putting the system together, and you're sometimes working with someone who may not be a part of your team, like myself, it allows for someone else to come in with that higher up view, that they're like, okay, I'm not lost in the everyday of what's taking place. I can see these things at a much bigger, a different viewpoint. And that actually helps inform the process as well.
Very well said. That's a very, very valuable. So a few things to just echo your points regarding asking customers. I think that it sounds so simple, and it is. Maybe it's not easy. It's very simple to do. I always tell people, don't confuse simple with easy. It's very simple. Sometimes it's tough to ask, but think about the gold that could come from just asking customers. So not only are they going to share with you, did what we delivered align with our values, but if they say something like, you guys did better than any vendor that we've ever had, I'm blown away, let me tell you, we saved money because of this, or you streamlined our process because of this, that customer just gave you a story that you can share with your next prospect. Listen, I just got done talking to Lisa. She said, because of what we implemented, we saved them hundreds of thousands of dollars and a tremendous amount of time. You're giving more emphasis on those stories, right? And I always talk about building a company culture of storytelling. That's a great way to do it, is talking to customers and simply asking them. So I really appreciate you mentioning that. There's a lot that we can learn from asking customers. Also, asking team members. I was recently talking to a CEO of a company, very large corporation. In fact, this leader, unbelievably humble human being. I mean, one of the most humble people I've met in his position. So he has a massive company. And one of the things that I was shocked by in a good way was he's always asking every one of his team members questions. It doesn't matter who they are. And he was telling me that he does all these walks. He walks throughout his company, and he was pulling aside people in the warehouse, asking them different questions. And because he was, to your point, asking people questions, he found out one of the processes they had in their warehouse was absolutely terrible. And one of the warehouse employees said, we literally can't find different things because everything looks the same. Could we do X, Y, and Z, add different color to our warehouse? If we just added different colors here and here, we would be able to grab the products quicker. We'd be able to save time. So now the leader, who is kind of looking down from your analogy of defense coordinator, offensive coordinator, looking down, he has this massive warehouse and they're telling him, we can't find products in a timely manner because everything looks exactly the same. If we did X, Y, and Z, he changed it. I mean, talk about improving a process, and your your employees' time management, your performance management really skyrockets based on it. So I really appreciate what you said. I think it was very, very valuable. One of the things I want a little bit of clarification on was you said going division by division. Do you mean by working with different departments?
Yeah, department by
Okay.
department. Yeah. And or I like to even say like kind of admin function, different functions within the business, because depending obviously on the size of it, you may not have a whole division. That one person might be that division.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
awesome.
And so, really though, breaking it down by different functions within the business, administrative, sales, marketing, financial, so that therefore you're, putting together that whole piece of that function area. So yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I just wanted the clarification on it. So what do
Yeah.
you do when different departments have their own processes and they're so obsessed with the processes they created that there's no unison, that basically they're just butting heads? What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, that's when we have to have those conversations. Literally a lot of times it's that mapping out of it. And sometimes you literally, like you said, you have to paint the picture for people. And sometimes it's like, it works well here in this silo, but when we take this out of the silo and we look at all of the other components of this business, is this obviously the best thing for us to do? How can we, it's like then the how and what questions come into. So what about this is it that we think we can change, or how can we do this better and make it so that there is more harmony in how these processes are working out? And I think that, eventually sometimes that's a conversation that might be with two different departments, divisions and leaders of those areas. And then sometimes it has to literally come from the top down with that conversation of, hey, we've tried working this out. And at this particular point, we've run into a roadblock. And so this is what is going on. This is what the recommendation is after, looking at all the things that we've looked at. And we're really just going to need a decision to be made, because I think sometimes we like to, it's like we hold on to certain things because we feel like there is no better way. And in all honesty, typically there is actually a better way. It's just that we're not always wanting to look for it, or we don't feel that we need to improve upon it because what we're doing actually works. And, I think that's great and wonderful. But I think as we all continue to evolve and change, new people come in, and we're learning even from this great resignation, people want to be heard, people want to be valued, people want to feel that their input is valued. And if you have this kind of closed mindset of this is the way we do it, this is the only way that it can be done, you really do not invite those other team members to be a part of the process. And as a result, they will most times take their talent somewhere else where they actually feel that they're making a contribution. Just like in your example, if that leader chose to totally ignore that, eventually that person who made that suggestion of adding color would probably go start looking for another position, because of the simple fact that, hey, I gave a really great suggestion that obviously everybody could see was needed, but it was pretty much ignored. And no one wants to kind of keep showing up in that environment of, I can't find things, everything looks alike, what are we doing here? You start to ask those questions, and wonder, am I really making an impact here? So I think opening up processes, opening up our minds, and a lot of times to be open to that additional feedback is super critical for our growth.
Yeah, and again, it goes back to being not all the times easy, but very simple to do. I mean, what you just said, it's so simple, just asking questions. I mean, at the top of every survey, people are saying they want to be valued, they want to have an impact, they want to be fulfilled. One of the most simplistic ways to do that is literally asking people questions.
Yeah.
That's why I appreciate you highlighting asking customers questions, asking your team members questions, because you're going to get so much input. There's going to be so many problem solution conversations that come out of just asking questions, and then also finding out why people are really doing what they're doing. So, you talked about going division by division, like really like, the 30,000 foot overview looking down into the different departments. Well, there might be a specific reason why a department's doing something. If another department just asks them, why, like what really can we do to help and support you? Why do you want to do X, Y, and Z? Like, what is the main thing you want to accomplish? And then try to go a few layers deep with the why. Why? I love going 5 layers deep with why. Sometimes that's not, appropriate depending on the situation, but I love finding like the root cause of that why, because then in the future, that other department can say, well, we found this one system that we can implement that's going to really help you with your why. Typically that person's not going to go against what they personally said. And it goes back to you asking these questions. If people don't ask questions, they're not getting this feedback. They're not getting this input. So I really appreciate you mentioned that.
Yeah, I think the question asking it's just super important. I mean, I think it's in all areas of our life. There's just some things that just constantly come up, whether it's with our kids, and sometimes they learn why a long time before we did, and it's an incessant why, but it really does. It's like asking of questions to gain that better understanding. And I think for us, it paints a more complete picture of either what someone's intention is, what their end result is, what it is that they're trying to achieve. And that actually does help inform us, whether we agree, disagree, can't fully like, okay, I get it, but whatever it is, at least now you have that and they've been able to express that. And I think that part is also just super valuable for everybody.
Absolutely. So I really appreciate your time. And I think that we uncovered a ton of stuff. So here are my takeaways. Is we had talked about the business playbook. We had talked about really focusing on the mission and value and the different stories that exemplify those values. You had talked about policies, the importance of actually having policies in place so A, B, and C, what things stand for. I thought that was really helpful. Also, you talked about how a lot of times we can get into our own heads too much, and we have to figure out a way to get the different thoughts that we have out on paper so that we can process and then we can come up with systems to make sure, is what I'm thinking just my anxiety talking, or is what I'm thinking actually going to play out in reality? And a good way to do that is getting it out of your head. I appreciate you mentioning that. And then also, I really appreciate you talking about questions, the simplicity of questions, but also the importance of questions, on how asking questions are going to give us different prompts that we may not have thought were there. So thank you so much for everything that you had mentioned, Kiva. If what was said during our conversation was, I know it's been helpful to everyone listening, but if someone wants to go a little bit deeper, what's the best way that they can connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. The best way would probably be through my website, which is the 516collaborative.com. They can also find me on LinkedIn. My name, KIVA SLADE. And I think those are the best 2 ways to reach out.
Okay, great. So what I'll do to make it extremely convenient for people, I'll put those in the show notes. People could just go right to you to get more information. I could just speak to, we have been connected on LinkedIn for quite some time, and I just feel like you post very thought-provoking, very valuable content. And I'll just let everyone know that if what you're posting that already has so much value, I can't imagine what happens when people work with you. So I would highly recommend people connect with you for sure. So thank you again for your time. I very much appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Matt. I appreciated it as well. And it's been great just to share with you and your audience.
Thank you for listening to the Stories with Traction podcast. If you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to drop an email to matt@mattzaun.com with the subject line Stories with Traction. Also, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, where I share tons of resources on how you can be a better storyteller. Remember, if you want to persuade with power and inspire those around you to action, you must share more stories.